All right, I don't see anybody else in the hallway, so let's get this party started. So my name's Cubby, at least for today. Whatever I say is my opinion only. It has no reflection on any company I may or may not work with who I will not identify. So with that opening, I'm here to tell you why you should stop orange pilling your friends and family. Been in Bitcoin since 2017, and if you've talked to people who've been around for a while, you probably have heard people say, I talked to my friend about it, they sort of got it, they bought some Bitcoin, they put it in Celsius, and now we're not friends anymore. So we're going to cover a little bit of that today. Oh, let me make sure I can go back here. So a couple of questions to kick us off here. So I'm assuming everybody in this room has somebody that they have told about Bitcoin. If you had to guess, like, who's told more than 100 people? How about more than 250? More than 500? I'm somewhere around 500 myself. So I've done this a lot and not had much success. So I feel like I'm here to pour some water on a fire. But of those people who you have tried to orange pill, how many of them adopted it early enough or bought enough Bitcoin that they're now rich or self-sufficient on it? Anybody got one, two? I got none myself, right? So as we go through, just kind of keep it in the back of your head, like, you're passionate about this. We believe that this can change the world. Why are so few people becoming Bitcoiners? Is it due to them, or is it due to the way that we're messaging it? So I have a theory. My theory is when most people say I want to orange pill you, they actually want to red pill you. If you want to orange pill, Bitcoin's actually pretty quick. It's either a medium of exchange or a store of value. If you want to red pill someone, you have to tear down their entire worldview and tell them that reality is a sham and it's you're Morpheus and they're Neo and it's going to be a 3-hour journey at least. Hope you have time tomorrow, right? So most people ignore the culture of the person that they're talking to. And I'm not talking about if you're from El Salvador, I'm talking about your mental framework. People in the US use a store of value framework. They compare it to digital gold. And that's why you see it on CNBC as a tech stock. Do we agree with that? No, but that's the cultural milieu, right? Whereas people in Venezuela or Argentina are going to compare it to their local fiat. It's a very different conversation for very different groups. Usually they're not the same person. So we talked about this a little bit, and I'm actually going to read it with you guys. If somebody says, like, you know, should I allocate 1% of my portfolio to Bitcoin, you can be pretty self-assured that you're talking to somebody who sees it as a store of value. If somebody says, we had 120% inflation yesterday, and we have 200% inflation today, you're probably talking to someone who's looking to not lose all of their wealth immediately. And a medium of exchange conversation is going to make a lot of sense. And you don't really need to talk about store of value, because they have a bigger problem they're trying to solve immediately, and that's not storing their money, it's making sure it's not stolen before they have the chance to spend it. So, if it takes longer than 3 minutes to orange pill somebody, first off, you're probably red pilling. Like, dial it back. Figure out what you want to tell this person about Bitcoin. Make sure it's digestible, that you give them clear action steps for whatever they need to do next. And ideally, you can offer support, but just don't be a jerk about it. Another possibility that it could take 3 minutes is you're trying to say Bitcoin's a store of value, it's a technology, it's a medium of exchange, it's a system of freedom, it's a global network of individuals coming together to fight against the man, and you're probably still red pilling. So keep that cultural context in mind. And then also keep in mind that some people need to learn the hard way. You know, some of us can watch the child put their hand in an oven and burn it, and some people, if you're like me, is like, ow. Ow, and I'll do it 3 or 4 times, right? Some of us are smarter than others. Hopefully y'all are smarter than I am. If you must persist, you should make sure that you really love this person, because it's going to take a long time, and you're probably going to fight about it for a really long time as well. In general, like, I've worked on my dad for about 3.5 years, and he's just now beginning to get it, so I say that, like, I've got like 0.5 Bitcoiners that I've converted, right? Very, very difficult. And when you're basically trying to deconstruct someone's worldview, I view it as an attack on their personal mind and their, like, system of liberty, their self-sense of liberty. Because you're trying to change the way that they see the world. Like, if you're talking to them at a bar, and you're like, so basically everything you believe is garbage, and you've been lied to your whole life, but hey, I gotta go meet up with my friends. Like that's kind of a bomb to drop if you don't have a follow-up to it. So I think in general, trying to keep it a little more lightweight and instead targeting people that you really, really want to invest in tends to lead itself to happier Bitcoiners. So what are we gonna do together? We need to stop orange pilling our friends, start minting maxis, and creating self-sufficient subcultures. So if you're here for some earlier talks, there's a lot of talk about activity in Berlin, El Salvador. I'm moving to Rutas de las Flores. We'll be doing something similar. El Zante, these are subcultures that are sort of reinforcing, have merchants that are already on board, and they're making it easy for daily spending. That's really, really critically important. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So, I've lost my spot here. All right, this is great. Bitcoin needs two things, really. One, it needs diamond hand hodlers. These are people probably in the United States. They're probably not necessarily individuals. They might be companies, they might be university endowments, they might be health insurance like Crowd Health out of Houston. And basically what we want them to do is build a castle that's fortified with Bitcoin that they don't touch all that often. And that gives Bitcoin lower volatility instead of other large institutions dumping on the market and wreaking havoc and chaos constantly. So you need people who are trustworthy to hold that store of value near and dear to their heart. And then we also need end users who are easily able to transact in Bitcoin, ideally every day, but fairly often so they can see value. It saves them something. It either saves them time, saves them effort. They don't have to go to an ATM, so it saves them a little bit in fees. But you need people to use it fairly frequently. And let's just think about a couple of things, right? They don't have to be in the same country. Bitcoin's global, it's borderless, it's decentralized. You can focus on these groups of people in two different places. Not everyone who's orange-pilled has to see it as a store of value, has to see it as a medium of exchange. They just have to see one of the value propositions first, and then that sets them down the rabbit hole so that they can self-teach. That's the goal. What's the hook? How do I hook them, and then how do they sink themselves down? I'll skip to the next one, actually. It's a little hard to see it, so I apologize. So it's critical that our medium of exchange groups and countries have a self-sufficient subculture. So if you've been to El Zante and tried to shop at places that even have Bitcoin signage, a lot of the times the owner won't be there and you can't actually pay in Bitcoin because they don't have access to the wallet. Or the first time I came to El Salvador at the airport, I tried to pay my $12 tax to get in. And they said, oh, the point of sale terminal doesn't have power. It'll take 30 minutes to charge up this phone. And I was like, there's 50 people behind me. I don't want to be the Bitcoin guy that's causing this for all these people who just came in. And they're like, well, Bitcoin sucks and I'm in a Bitcoin country. So I paid cash, right? These things take time, for sure. But we just need to be careful whenever we're orange pilling people and making sure that they have some sort of system that is in place, and we need to be focused on building those systems so that they can succeed. So I'm going to talk a lot about subcultures. This is something probably most of us haven't investigated. That link over there is dope. That whole site's great. It's from a physicist and a philosopher who writes a lot about how people and organizations form, how subcultures form over time. Really great article. I'm going to give you guys a framework, and I'm hoping that it kind of lands for you. So how do subcultures form? Usually you have a creator. This might be Satoshi, it might be somebody else, and they make something really magical. And that magic draws practitioners or fanatics or wizards or whatever. They're interested in the magic, they're giving to the magic, they're making that magic stronger. And the fanatics spend their time and energy to create a community, or the word I prefer is a scene, a happening. It's a place where people are sort of co-located, either in person or online, but they're all committing changes to that magic together. Unfortunately, scenes attract muggles. So if you're familiar with Harry Potter, the muggles are folks who do not have the ability to wield magic. A squib in Harry Potter is somebody who has a little bit of magic, but kind of resents everybody. We're not going to talk about them unless I have time at the end. So we're attracting muggles whenever a fanatic and creator scene have combined into something that has enough energy or enough magic to attract members of the public or sociopaths. And sociopaths, I think you guys are going to have a lot of experience with. But first, let's talk about members of the public. See if this sounds familiar. They sort of consume your creative output. They aren't necessarily magical themselves. They probably talk a lot about Bitcoin. They probably, have Bitcoin gear that they wear. But it's usually like a status symbol. So when you have a conversation with them, it feels like the same conversation you've had with 100 other people. And you're like, man, I really wish we could get into something that feels more, I don't know, intense. But you can't get there. And these are people who are usually new. The first 6 months of Bitcoin, we all go through that like, oh my gosh, it's so much. But a lot of people don't ever really seem to grow out of that. And of course, they always end up in Twitter spaces. And sometimes that makes it really difficult to have fun in one of those. And sociopaths are, I'm sure you can think of a couple. I think they're sociopathic companies. And you can also be a good sociopath. It's just someone who wants to essentially extract value from the non-magical people and monetize them in some way. But basically, they grift off of the members of the public, the MOPs, the MOP, and then they try to monetize them in some sort of methodology. And when they're a malevolent or an evil sociopath, basically what they want to do is take what the fanatics have done, twist it to their own ends, and create monetization off of that. So you might be thinking like, who could have possibly done that? Well, in the last couple of years, we have a company called FTX, which has done a couple of things. We got Celsius, BlockFi, 20,000 altcoins, right? There's a lot of them. If you've ever talked to a maximalist who said like, I just don't understand Bitcoin anymore. I wish it was like it was in 2012. I wish it was like in 2015. Like, I can't connect with people that see Bitcoin in the same way I do. That's a fanatic who's getting burned out. And if you guys are fanatics, I don't want to see that happen to you. And that's why we're talking today. So, what are the death throes of a subculture? Basically, the sociopaths continue to attack it until they eventually draw all of the value and passion away and push the passionate people out into something else. And they extract maximum value from the members of the public until the members of the public say, screw this whole crypto thing, screw Bitcoin, I don't want anything to do with it, it's all a scam. That has happened in every single cycle. And unfortunately, it's going to happen again in 2025, 2026. It's up to us on whether we can prevent that. And that's by focusing on the people that are going to become fanatics themselves and empowering them with the ability and information to educate those other muggles so that it doesn't happen to them. So I saw a couple of nods, but this generally sounds familiar to you guys, right? Like I'm not totally off the mark here. Let's think about some other examples, maybe outside of Bitcoin. You might have like the COVID vax, right? You have people who create it, people get really excited about it, then it gets monetized by Pfizer, you have tons of ads, and it creates a lot of just thrash in society. We've had one of these, it feels like every month for the last 3 years. And within Bitcoin, of course, you have ICOs, you have NFTs, next cycle, you might have ETFs, and it goes on and on. So if you use this framework of people who are passionate, those fanatics who create or build upon the creator's vision, the magic there, it really applies to basically everything that I've kind of thrown at it. And this isn't my theory, I'm just sort of expounding upon somebody else's who's put it together for me. But it's very robust. Are you guys actually interested in hearing anything about these, like the Beatles, Spanish Inquisition? Any of these strike you as interesting? Which one? I got a couple of minutes. I can explain one if you want to. Fall of Rome. Okay, so the fall of Rome, basically, like Rome stood for a really long time, right? And then Rome starts to have more and more people come in. There's members of the public, let's call them. And over time, it grows and grows and grows, and sociopaths get in control of Rome. They start clipping coins, so they're extracting values from the muggles via inflation until Rome essentially falls. So you have like people who create something with great vision. You have a really strong army that's then diluted over time by people cutting corners and like, oh, I just need a little bit more value because I've got this pet project, or wouldn't it be great if Bitcoin blocks were unlimited in megabyte size, or whatever. It's the same thing that happens over and over. It's why fiat dies. It's a repackaging of things that I believe others have talked about a lot. In the Beatles, it's actually kind of interesting. If you read John Lennon or Paul McCartney, he said, we stopped being the Beatles because we couldn't hear ourselves. And he means that literally because they basically had to develop PA systems because the Beatles are so popular, they couldn't play small venues anymore. So they couldn't hear anything. And John Lennon was saying, now we're bigger than Jesus Christ. People won't believe in Jesus anymore. They'll believe in us. And people had a huge response to that. And so you had this massive ego of the creator. And John Lennon sort of became his own sociopath. So we'll return a little bit and talk about orange pilling friends. There's kind of two outcomes. I think it's maybe more of a spectrum, but for the purposes of this talk, let's consider two outcomes. If you're successful in getting someone to kind of buy a little Bitcoin, what you're probably doing is creating a mop, again, that means member of the public, who's going to turn into food for a sociopath. So all you're doing in many cases is just creating someone who's going to see some opportunity, think this seems too good to be true, not second guess themselves, and then lose a bunch of money and sort of hate Bitcoin forever. That's in a store of value context. And if you're talking to somebody in a medium of exchange, if they don't have a powerful network that's around them so that they can see the value of Bitcoin on a day-to-day basis, it's not something somebody gave them once and then they forget they have in their phone. They become complacent and unlikely to ever really want to use Bitcoin again because you've lost that ability of that first impression. It's very powerful, and once it goes awry, it's difficult to pull it back. If you're unsuccessful, like you're at Thanksgiving, you say, hey, let me tell you about Bitcoin. You're wearing one of these hats. You got on like a Lightning Store shirt, subtle. You're probably going to have some really annoyed people at your table. Might have some damaged relationships with your family. It reminds me of this joke, like, how do you know somebody's a Bitcoiner? Don't worry, they'll tell you. It's just the way that it goes, right? And generally, it's not successful. Maybe it plants a seed and you walk away. But more often than not, that's just a seed for food that turns into food for a sociopath, right? Wait, I somehow skipped to the end. I don't even know how that happened. Hold on a second. We will fix this together. The good thing about being a designer is I can kind of troubleshoot my own issues. It's just a little bit difficult from the side. Hold on a second, I'm going to move over here. All right. Uh-oh. There we go. And we were right here talking about this one, right? We were the one before it, but I'm going to move us to this. Great. So I've kind of been really negative and terrible. I'm sorry, but there's good news. I'm going to tell you how we can start fixing it together. And there's even better news. I don't have all the answers. I'm looking for people to help me figure it out. So if you want to connect, please follow me on Twitter. Meet with me here. Happy to have a beer, especially after the last couple of days I've had. Maybe 3. I'm happy to talk about this, figure out ways we can do it together, and make this next cycle a little bit hungrier for the sociopaths. Let's go through a couple of ways. So if you live in a store value culture, I'm actually going to step over here so I can see instead of looking crazy. What I would say is keep in your mind, my goal here in the United States, fortify the castle, build out the moat, make the drawbridge heavier, prevent the barbarians, the sociopaths from coming in and attacking my people I have back here. And by that I mean you're probably going to talk about building up your treasury so that you can afford all those upgrades, right? Think about, if you're going to pitch to somebody, say, look, this is the best performing asset over the last 15 years. You're telling me that you might be unwilling to commit 0.1% of your portfolio to seeing what happens? It's pretty persuasive for most people if they have an investor mindset. You don't really need to talk about the medium of exchange because all you're doing is giving them that initial hook that then sinks them down the Bitcoin rabbit hole if they want. And ultimately, a 0.1% exposure is really little. And if you live in the United States and you're like, what I really care about is using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, there's some excellent options. You can order things. If you live in certain communities, you might be able to use it every day. You can order things online. But I would also encourage you to live vicariously and seek out people you can sponsor in places like El Salvador or Argentina or groups that are doing this across the world. And you can scratch that itch to see to see Bitcoin used as a medium of exchange by helping people who are on the ground in Berlin, in El Zante, in Escalon, anywhere in El Salvador, Ruta de los Flores, like me. You can help us, come visit us. Happy to buy you a steak at La Pampa. It'll be a great time. Help us, live vicariously. Orange pill your friends to fortify the castle. They don't necessarily have to use Bitcoin every day. They're still being Bitcoiners. So, if you live in a medium of exchange culture, or if you want to make one, you need to identify what I call a self-sufficient subculture and support it relentlessly. What is a self-sufficient subculture? And what do they have in common? So, a self-sufficient subculture might be like what they're building in Berlin. It seems like that's close. But generally speaking, from a US context, we don't have a lot of those. In El Salvador, there's a few. I think in El Zante, it's like about 50% likely that you can pay with Bitcoin, but it's becoming better over time. So I'm going to speak mostly from a US context, at least initially, and then if I have time at the end, we can talk about ways we can improve things in El Salvador. But if you want to find a subculture, create it in Orange Pill in the US, I have really good news for you. There's at least 80 million of them. They're untapped, and nobody has done anything that I'm aware of to reach out to them. And they follow a guy named Donald Trump. So basically, if you had to pick somebody who was already red pilled, that way you don't have to red pill them, you just want to orange pill them, right? What qualities do you want? Mistrust of authority, COVID vax, education system, literally every war ever. Thousands of examples in the last 50 years, certainly within the last 3 years. MAGA has that, lots of others do as well. But MAGA is a really good example. Tech-independent communication channels. Do you know how many boomers have started using Telegram because they no longer trust iMessage, Google Chat, or email? Literally millions. Never thought it would happen. Last 3 years, huge boom in content for those folks. A desire to resist the mainstream, very prevalent, not just with MAGA, but with like a lot of groups. And then there's a strong desire for social cohesion that's driven by some sort of oppression from some sort of regime. And I'm not talking about Joe Biden and the Democrats. I'm talking about the regime of the culture. And there are non-right-wing regimes as well. These are people like, if you're interested in trans rights, absolutely applies to them. Absolutely. If you're talking about gay rights in a lot of countries, exactly the same thing. But there's a lot of opportunities to be a little bit more political if you're a political person and talk to people who are already red-pilled in some way and say, hey, would you consider like maybe setting up Bitcoin donations? It's a much easier conversation. And with my Trump sticker, like I don't actually support the guy all that much. I just support the people who support him. So it's really cool to talk to patriotic Americans who are into farming, self-sufficiency, and I get like daps at the airport. They see Bitcoin stickers. We have a conversation. It's really effective for me. So I think that there's some opportunity to like consider these things and try to find subcultures that are already like doing their own thing, already have their own distribution networks. Actually, Galoy does a really good job of empowering churches, which is another classic example of people who have their own marketing, their own outreach, their own systems. Everybody congregates in the same place every week. Why not accept donations of Bitcoin? Why not take tithes in Bitcoin? All right, I got a couple minutes left here. So note, if you are trying to create that like sort of self-sufficient subculture, it tends to be very difficult to create one from scratch. That's why I would suggest trying to identify one that is underutilized and ever present. Much easier if you can find the group, go to a rally with 80,000 people, set up a booth, and have a conversation. As far as I know, that's not being done. I think that's a wasted opportunity. I don't know exactly how we do that, but I would like to find out. So, already gone through the regime oppression stuff, and we won't go through that again. But like, if you're living in SOV culture and you really want to interact with people who are interested in medium of exchange, I would recommend that you maybe like rethink that, because you might be just minting more sociopath food and non-magical folks, especially if they don't have the network to see value in Bitcoin. Because when you don't have the network to see value in Bitcoin and use it every day, the outcome of that is that you seek yield. and you put that Bitcoin in Celsius or whatever the next thing is because you want a little bit more. You want some interaction. You want to see that money giving money back to you. It's very human, very difficult to resist because it's just culturally ingrained in people from these SOV countries. But there is good news. If you want a country that has a medium of exchange and store value future for it, you're in it. You're in El Salvador. It's not perfect. It's not, medium of exchange is not everywhere in the country. It's being rolled out. You want to have those conversations with people, you can go on the street and have a conversation today with somebody about that. Might have to be in Spanish, so work on that a little bit first, but I think you can succeed here whichever way you want. If you want to have a store value conversation with somebody, there's a lot of gringos like myself in the country. We're really loud and obnoxious on Twitter. So, hit us up. This is a great place to spend some time if you're like, how do I talk to people on the ground who are wrestling with these issues, who are probably really into Bitcoin to leave their country to move somewhere in Central America, right? I do have some final thoughts, and then I'll pause on the final screen for any questions you all might have. So final thoughts, pure positivity. Focus on your talents, your personal connections, your family relationships, and most importantly on the things that bring you joy. Do more of those. If orange pilling people only brings you sadness because seeing them lose their money, waste it, fight with you, buy Ethereum, buy an NFT, then maybe figure out a different way around that. Focus on your joy, try to optimize for that, and don't get bogged down in the negativity of seeing something that you love not loved by somebody else because they're just not ready yet. And if you're really, really committed to orange pilling and saving the world, then I would really like it if you could do it fast because we need help. Like, we need so much help. And if you're one of those people who, despite everything that's maybe happened to you in terms of talking to people about Bitcoin or seeing it not work so well, or just not adopt it as fast as you want, and you're still relentlessly pursuing it, then let me know. I want to follow you, and I'd like to be friends. So it's the end of my talk. Thank you, guys. Stop orange pilling your friends. It's my Twitter. Happy to connect with you. Happy to talk anytime. Looks like I got like 30 seconds, so I may not have time. Any pressing questions from folks? Covered it. All right. Thank you, guys.